Women are always encouraged to eat less and be small.
Being in this underfed state, our body doesn't feel safe.
Women need fuel. They need to.
I'm Dr. Kristen Holmes. Dr. Stacy Sims is a physiologist and nutrition scientist who has spent her career fighting to break the male-dominated mindset in health and fitness.
When I wanted to follow my dad's footsteps, be a SEAL or something, and he's like, well, you can't because you're a girl. What do you mean? Around age 8 or 9 with girls, we see the lengthening of the arms and the legs, but not an increase in bone density. So if they're trying to run or jump and they have these new mechanics, it predisposes them to injury. We don't reteach our girls how to run, how to throw, how to jump, how to land.
To not invest in helping women has an enormous cost. Fasting, a lot of people swear by it.
There's lots of issues. It causes an incredible catabolic load. Both men and women who hold a fast till 12 or after do not have any.
Boom. Your base fitness level, will that determine the type of symptoms you develop in perimenopause?
High intensity interval training, great. Sprint interval training, that's really powerful for,
wow, yeah.
If you were to do one takeaway, you have to.
I'm an individual who believes in living my core values, but it can be a challenge sometimes when there are a lot of demands on my time. Life lately has felt especially busy between meetings and research, book writing, live talks, self-care, and family time. My days are already really busy. Then I added a podcast and things started to feel, well, a little out of balance, which is why you're hearing me talk about my new show sponsor. Fiverr is a virtual assistant who's legitimately helped me reclaim my time and my peace. Fiverr is the marketplace where thousands of skilled freelancers are ready to meet your business or personal needs. Browse portfolios to find someone whose expertise, skills, and budget aligns with yours. It's literally that simple. If you're looking to free up time in your life, head to fiverr.com or click the link in the description and use code Kristen, Kristen, at checkout for 10% off your first hire. That's Fiverr.com. I spent a lot of the day looking at and understanding data, so I wanted to share some data with you before we start the show. This amazing community is growing every day. It's a community of folks who are committed to living their life to the fullest potential. But guess what? The data is showing me that we haven't even begun to unlock the full potential of the show, because 70% of you that watch and listen to the show aren't subscribed yet. Subscribing helps us more than you know. You will be notified every single time that we release a new episode, and you can join our thriving global community. Thank you. Let's get into it.
I'd love to, for folks who aren't as familiar with your work as I am, I'd love to just, for you to tell folks, really what triggered your passion for studying women's health and, just the journey that you've been on the last couple of decades.
Yeah. So I've always been, ever since I was little, the person that asked why and wanting to know.
Like we all become scientists.
Why? I know we become scientists. But also because of my background as a kid, traveling around and seeing different cultures, understanding different perspectives, and then not understanding why someone couldn't have something that I could have just because they look different or came from a different culture. So it was that whole inequality and injustice that really got under my skin, where I'm like, that's just not fair. And I don't like when things are not fair. So that's kind of the drive where, when I wanted to follow my dad's footsteps and kind of go into Army Ranger or be a SEAL or something. And he's like, well, you can't because you're a girl. I got so incensed. I was like, what do you mean? So then when I got to university and got into studying ex-phys, and all the representation in the textbooks were always he or they. There was nothing in there about women. Right. And being an athlete, we're training the same as the men, but it was still off kilter. So it was just a seed that had been planted by being told I couldn't do something because I was a girl. Yeah. That really kind of has sit with me for the decades. And every time something comes up, I'm like, okay, where's the data for women? What do you mean there's no data for women? Well, how can you say that we have to do X, Y, Z for this outcome when it's only been tested on men? And as I've gone through and realized that most of what we know is done on men, it's still done on men and generalized to women, I keep pushing. Yeah. And pushing and pushing and pushing. And now my daughter, she's 12 and she is surfer, soccer player, wants to do all the things, and seeing her struggle, not necessarily in her sport, but with her friends who don't come from the sporting background, but they still have some of that mindset that we grew up with. Yeah. Calories in, being fat, trying to fit in, and I'm breaking it. And so I'm like, if I can break it for my kid, then let's push that out and try to break it for so many others.
Yeah. How do you approach the conversation with your own daughter? And that's a big question, and it might force us to jump around a little bit, but I think that's such a great place to start. Is how do we think about our daughters? As they're getting their period and their bodies are changing, and do they go on hormonal birth control? Like, what do they do? What do you tell your daughter?
We've been talking about this stuff. Like, I started early when she's 5 or 6, and there's a book called Girls Stuff for girls under the age of 13. So it's like a graphic book where it explains some of the changes that are going on. Some of it stuck when she was younger, but now she's like, oh, I want the one that's for 13 older, because it gets into the social things and the things that are happening. So we would read that as a storybook.
Oh, I love it.
Starting early.
Yeah.
But now she's going through things and her mood changes. She's like, well, why can't I do a pull-up now? I could do 10 in a row last year. It's like, well, because your center of gravity has changed, your arms are longer. So explaining all the things. Yeah. And then she and her friends are always like, really, when's my period going to come? And what's it like? So we have conversations about that. But every time I have a conversation about body changes, I put it into a body positivity. You don't have pull-ups now because your body's changed, but that doesn't mean you can't be strong and get them back. Like, if we look at how your body's changed and we work on strength in these new movement patterns, or how you're jumping and landing, and she's like, I'm going to be strong. Great. So we always bring it back to strength and movement, not about what you look like or what someone says or what you're eating, because all of that is that negative connotation that we've existed with in society for so long.
Yeah. Let's talk a little bit about just the research landscape. And I think it's worth noting, we're in a, physiology, exercise physiology, sports science, like very male dominated.
Yes.
I mean, you go to a conference and there's a few of us, if we're lucky. Is that changing? And if not, why?
I know. I would like to say yes, but in reality, no. Comes down to now funding, but not necessarily this traditional funding. It's who can have the best clickbait, who can have the best show on social media, so then they can get companies interested in what they're doing, is one avenue. And then the other is when we look at the academic landscape of who gets promoted, who gets the kind of pat on the back from a lot of the universities, who's the PI, it tends to be men.
Yeah.
It's a very small amount of women who get to rise up in the ranks. Yeah. The very vocal ones, yes, and the ones that may or may not have taken time out for family. So there is a family discrepancy within it.
Yeah.
It's still there.
Yeah.
It's still there.
It is more complicated to study women. It is the reality of it, and
I like to say it's more complex.
It's more complex. Okay.
Not complicated.
Okay, good. Yeah, it is more complex. And it does require, bigger sample sizes, and, you have to really rethink the funding.
Yeah.
But what would be your advice? Because I think, researchers listen to these, podcasts. What is the talk track for a researcher to kind of reframe their thinking about being inclusive in their research?
I bring it back to when science started, the modernization of medicine, where who designed the studies? It was who was in the room around the table. It was men. So we have defaulted into understanding scientific design from a male perspective.
Right.
If we were to rewrite history and say who was around the table, it was women, then it wouldn't be so complex to study women. So when people are like, well, what do you mean by that? I'm like, well, if women were around the table in the room when we started scientific design, then automatically menstrual cycle would be in the conversation because that's just a natural thing that happens. Understanding the bootstrapping that happens and the modeling that happens, because with AI coming, and we know that AI is learning from existing models, and we need to change that.
Yeah.
So if we want to keep moving forward, we need to have these conversations, and it shouldn't just be at a specific conference that's titled female athlete. It needs to be at these bigger conferences.
I mean, these models are going to be trained on male data.
Right, exactly.
So I know we need to stay ahead of it. So I'm feeling like this sense of urgency right now around that, because I'm like, we could end up down the same path if we don't intervene and
Yeah.
make sure that.
And the people won't question it because it comes from AI. And here's the outcome. This is trolling through everything, and here's the outcome. But I'm like, nope, because what they're trolling through is inappropriate. And we're going to be backwards back to the 50s or 60s.
Okay, good. I'm glad you're thinking about this.
Yes, all the time.
All the time. All right, we'll continue that conversation offline. So, let's just talk about physiology real quick. And I definitely want to talk about, ACL injuries and how to prevent them. What can women do to protect themselves against ACL? Because I know, women have a higher rate of ACL tear than men. So I'd love to talk about that. But maybe just a quick primer on just the anatomical differences between men and women.
Yeah. So this comes down to the conversations I've been having with my daughter going through puberty, right? So when we look at what happens, and it starts to happen around age 8 or 9 with girls, we start to have epigenetic exposure of estrogen. So if you think about a lock and key, estrogen's coming in, turning the lock, and now all these things are starting to change. We see one of the first things is the lengthening of the arms and the legs, but not a corresponding increase in bone density. So you have a lengthening, but not very strong, and then you don't have the musculature around it. With that, you also have a widening of the hips. So the Q angle, so the angle from the hip to the knee, gets wider. So if they're trying to run or jump and they have these new mechanics and they're not very strong and they have weaker bones, it predisposes them to feeling not so great in their running form and or injury, which is
just feeling less stable.
Yeah. Which is why now you don't see girls on monkey bars, right? Or doing pull-ups, because not only do their hips widen, but their shoulders widen to match the gait that they have. And then you have a change in center of gravity. So it goes from being up in the chest area where it is for men and boys down to the hip area. So again, if you're trying to do pull-ups or something like that, it's harder because your center of gravity is lower. And when you're looking at all of these changes, then we also have to look at muscle morphology. So if we're looking at muscle fiber types, there's not too much of a difference between boys and girls because there's more of the endurant type fibers that are expressed in younger boys. We start seeing a change around that 9-10-year-old part with boys where they start getting more glycolytic fibers. So your fast twitch fibers are being expressed. Girls have more endurant fibers, and it holds through everything. Okay. So we're seeing that there's more of the oxidative fibers. Girls and women end up with more of the MCT1s, which means that you have better mitochondrial function, better at burning fat. And because of that, you also have an increase in body fat that comes on. So when we're looking at the changes in the muscle fiber expression and utilization, it also predisposes girls to putting on more body fat. It's not just estrogen. So there's a driver of a feedback mechanism of fueling that comes into play. So now we'll see girls and boys who used to be running and playing, and the girls are beating them on the soccer field or the rugby field or in cross country. And now the girls are lagging behind, which is another, quote, slap in the face where they want to drop out of sport. Yeah. So all of these things happen. And we don't reteach our girls how to run, how to throw, how to jump, how to land. Yeah. Don't understand that they are more quad dominant and have to work on posterior chain. Right. Don't understand that the core strength is suffering because we have an increased lengthening of our peripheral, so our arms and our legs. Mm-hmm. So when we look at all of that coming up to it and girls dropping out of being physically active, or those who drop back and then try to get back into sport, this is where you start seeing a lot of soft tissue issues and the predisposition to knee sprains, which I found it is the technical word for saying any kind of tear in a ligament. Yeah.
When we think about, the implications of girls not participating in sports, dropping out of sports, what is the effect on society?
I see that right now. We're looking at a huge mental health issue. And we see some of the interventions that they're putting into smaller schools is physical activity. And it's not just the typical running and PE that we grew up with, because if you tell someone to run, they don't like it. They're going to say no, and they're not going to enjoy physical activity. Right. So there's strength training, there's functional training, which is more resistance bands and body weights. It's a lot of play, making it fun. And when they implement that, there's a drop in mental health issues. There's better concentration. There's better body composition. So when we're looking forward to all of that, it's better body positivity and feeling better. And we know that as adults, when you exercise, and it doesn't matter if it's long or short, if it's strength training or high intensity, you get that sense of, I feel good.
Yeah.
So when you're implementing that first thing in the morning before a long day in the classroom, you're finding better attention, better learning, and then it feeds forward to more energy in the afternoon, better conversations with your peers, with your parents, with your teachers. So the physical activity thing is so important, and it's not just keeping you in sport, it's just being physically active.
When we zoom out and we think about women being less active because all of these changes and how destabilizing it can be, and I think there's a spectrum. For some women, it's more destabilizing than others for whatever reason.
Yeah.
But to not invest in helping women find or retrain how to move their body after these changes has an enormous cost to society.
Huge.
And I think that's what isn't maybe being quantified and talked about in the way that it needs to be. Because I don't see those resources actually being shifted. Tell me.
We're launching a next gen course next month that covers all of this. And in conjunction to that, I've partnered with Haley Babcock to create a strength training program for early to late puberty for girls.
Oh my gosh, that is
because I'm
music to
so
my-
frustrated with the like you see this happening and you know what you can do.
I just get like goosebumps all over.
I know, me too, because I'm so excited because it's pitched for.
I love Haley.
I know, me too. It's pitched for the girls themselves when they're a little bit older, like 15 plus. Parents, coaches, anyone who wants to learn about puberty. And it's not just all the physiological changes. It's the sociocultural things that are wrapped around it.
Biopsychosocial.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Community is so important. And the language that's used.
Yes.
Because if you're working with a bunch of girls and you're saying, ooh, girl push-ups and this, it's like perpetuating that girls are second best.
Yeah, totally.
And I don't want that. Yeah. So we're talking all of that. So
I love it.
A resource.
This program that you're putting into place for young girls, does it include ACL prevention? So specific training around how to, get ahead of that?
Mm-hmm. Because it's all about that posterior chain.
Yeah.
And understanding training stress, how paying attention to your menstrual cycle and how you feel. Yeah. Especially the early stages when you don't know how it affects you, making that normalized. So there's so many layers of education that goes with it. But the biggest, like if you were to do one takeaway, it's like you have to relearn how to pivot to move and also to have a very strong posterior chain. And those are the two main points. And then the subsidiaries are, here's the education around menstrual cycle, here's the education around some of the other reproductive health issues like PCOS, onset, and those kinds of things. So there's different layers there, but I always have here the top two, and then these are your sub layers. So the hope is that it does start to get and snowball so that we have less issue with ACL. Yeah. We have less issue with other soft tissue injuries, and we have a better sport culture and breaking that toxic sport culture that's so endemic in high performance sport.
Yeah. Talk about the dangers of being in a catabolic state for a woman and just how that translates to injury risk, illness risk, mental health issues. I don't think people connect those dots enough.
Yeah. So there is that whole, I guess, the sociocultural part where women are always encouraged to eat less and be small. Mm-hmm. And that feeds forward into active women who are like, well, I want to look a certain way. But if we are not fueling for what we are doing, then we stay in this breakdown state. So we have an elevation in cortisol, which we know drives the sympathetic system. Mm-hmm. We see that one of the first things that go is lean mass, and that's not just muscle tissue, it's also bone. So if we're always in this catabolic state, because one, we're delaying food intake, or two, we're training without eating first, or we're delaying food intake as well as fasted training, then the hypothalamus is always perceiving you to be in a fight or flight situation, which again drives sympathetic nervous system, and it promotes a dampening of our appetite. Because the body's like, okay, I need to conserve what I have, so I'm going to conserve fat. And there's that misstep between needing to eat and understanding that there's not fuel available. So if we were to have a really high hunger drive, it wouldn't be conducive to being able to concentrate to get away.
Yeah.
So there's a whole bunch of hormonal contexts that change. And then we see this as a new normal. So we have a higher cortisol level. We have the impetus to break down muscle and bone. And we have the misstep of our ghrelin and leptin. So our appetite is askew. And we'll see a lot of women also have a muted appetite after exercise. So it perpetuates the issue. When I get the conversation going, or women are starting to do a lot of strength training and they're dropping cardio, there's that misstep of, well, how come I'm not lean like the women who are on the treadmill or the elliptical or out running? And I always bring it back to, I want to see the inside of their body.
Yes.
Because if they're older and they're not doing strength training and they're not eating, they might be super lean, but the muscle quality isn't there. There's probably a lot of soft tissue injuries that aren't healing, small micro tears, and their bones are probably like chalk. Yeah. So we have to be very cognizant that women need fuel. They need to eat, and we need to tell women, take up space. Don't be small. Eat. It's good for you. Just take up the room.
You said so many things that are really, I think, important to kind of dig into a little bit. Just for some folks who are new to the nervous system, might not know that, we have two branches of our autonomic nervous system, the sympathetic and parasympathetic. And you mentioned the sympathetic, and basically being in this underfed state, our body doesn't feel safe.
No.
So it activates the sympathetic branch of the nervous system, which is basically telling your body that something is wrong. And maybe talk about the consequences of what happens when our body doesn't feel safe long term. What happens to our period? What are the risk factors associated with that?
Yeah. So I bring it down to, like, if I was explaining it to someone who has no science background, it's tired but wired, right? You always feel tired no matter how much sleep you get, and you always feel on edge. Yeah. So if you're in
jittery.
Jittery, like alert, and small things get under your skin really easily. And it is because your body is in such a state of what's going on. Yeah. When do I have to fight, or when do I have to flee? So if you're constantly in that state, your body is preparing for that. And one of the things that happens is there's a downturn of your luteinizing hormone pulse, your estrogen production, because if you're in this really stressed state, the whole body is perceiving it as a non-conducive environment for becoming pregnant.
Right. So even if you don't want a baby,
your
body, it doesn't care. It's still preparing for that.
Exactly. Yeah. So it's like, let's turn off that menstrual cycle thing. Let's down-regulate all of our sex hormones. Yeah. And we know that every system of the body requires estrogen, progesterone until, we get to the reverse of puberty, and then that's a different story. But when you have hypothalamic amenorrhea, which is the hypothalamus turning off your menstrual cycle, it's the same as all of a sudden.
So your brain is signaling that, hey, things aren't safe here.
Right.
Okay, we're not going to bring a baby into this world.
Right, exactly.
And so it just shuts everything down.
Right.
Okay.
And because it's trying to protect you, it puts body fat on as a high storage fuel. And it also starts chewing through your lean mass.
So it's taking from your bone. It's taking from your muscle.
Exactly.
It's taking from everything it can to try to recreate a scenario where it's safe to have a baby.
Right. Exactly.
And I think a lot of it is, it's hard to get a younger person, who's 23 years old thinking kind of longer term, and I think that's, and maybe a good segue is to talk about hormonal birth control and how that can mute a lot of these signals potentially. And I don't want to, say hormonal birth control is bad, but maybe talk us through how to think about birth control.
Yeah.
And its impact on performance, and its impact on our health potentially. And I know there's still a lot of research to be done in this area, but there is some evidence that it's not as benign as we thought it was.
Right.
So would love to just talk about the evidence that does exist, and what are your recommendations for a young athlete, and if that we can maybe transition that into, how does a 30-year-old think about that? How does a 40-year-old think about
for sure.
control? Thank you.
So if we think about hormonal birth control, we see the primary one is the combined oral contraceptive pill. Then we see a progestin only, where it might be an IUD, it might be progestin-only pill. We see the implants, so that's another progestin and a little bit of estrogen. And then you have like the vaginal ring. So there's so many different formulations.
Yeah.
Most of the research has been done on combined oral contraceptive pill and the IUD. So if we're looking at that, we see that the combined oral contraceptive pill, which is estrogen and progesterone together, it's experimental in its own right because there's so many different formulations of progesterone that goes with the estradiol. And the whole job of a combined oral contraceptive pill is to downregulate your natural endocrine system. So that means that you're not producing your own estrogen, you're not ovulating, you have these other hormones that are taking the place. And because you're taking a pill every day, you have a peak and then a drop off. And this is why you have to take the pill at the same time every day to maintain somewhat consistency. Your normal cycle is you have pulses every day. So you have a pulse at one time a day and another pulse in another part of the day. So you have these significant signalings. So your body's always getting a kind of a titration of hormones instead of a big wallop. So when we're looking at how these oral contraceptive pills affect all the systems of the body, we see that it affects heart rate variability. We see that in the metrics for recovery. We also see there's a greater oxidative status, a greater inflammatory status. How that affects things like soft tissue and ACL, don't know. When we're looking at kind of brain and brain morphology, we know that that can affect volume as well as gray matter and how the brain's neuroplasticity is affected for things like muscle contraction speed and accumulation of skill. We see that, in the natural cycle, we have changes of volume and gray matter too, but not to the extent where we're seeing with oral contraceptive pills. There was a study that was put out last June that was looking at the amygdala, and being on an OC really shrinks it. So if we're thinking about a young girl being on an OC and changing the structure of the brain, we don't know if it's reversible or not. We see in older adults, it is reversible because they've gone through the growth development.
Right.
So if you get put on an OC or you choose to take an OC when you're in your 20s, you've already gone through that brain development. So when you come off it, you have that change back to normalcy.
Do you know
baseline.
how long it takes to kind of restore that plasticity?
Yeah. So they only followed for a year.
Okay.
And most came back to baseline within that year.
Wow. That's
but for the younger development girls, there wasn't a change. Which is really scary, right? Because right now, if there's an issue with menstrual cycle, a lot of GPs don't have the understanding that it's normal to be irregular for the first 5 years. And yes, it's going to be heavier. Yes, you're going to have changes, but there are things to do besides say, oh, here's an oral contraceptive pill. Yeah. Because it's downregulating your body's own system.
That is the default.
Right. And they pass it all like Skittles. It's really frustrating. I know. And there's so many things that you can think about. If someone goes, well, I have really bad skin. Well, we can see a dermatologist. Yeah. I'm having really heavy bleeding. Is it normal, or is it because you're just starting your cyclical life and this is the onset? Well, if it is, we can look at using tranexamic acid or some other things at the start of a bleed. Maybe we look and put you on a progestin-only pill that doesn't have the same impact as combined oral contraceptive pill. There are many solutions to some of the things that girls go to a physician for, but the lack of time, the lack of education, and the way the healthcare system is now, it's always an OC.
Yeah.
So when I'm looking at someone who's like 15 or 16 and they're getting pushed to be put on an OC, I'm like, okay, well, let's take a pause and see why. Is it irregularity? Is it cramping? Is it pain? Is it skin? Let's have a big conversation to find out what the symptoms are, because there are some alternatives. Yeah. If you have endometriosis, that's a different story. Maybe you do need that.
Exactly what that is, and maybe, PCOS as well.
So endometriosis is when the uterine lining grows on all the organs outside of the uterus. So you will have cramping and bleeding, and it's such a severe pain that people, they feel crippled by it.
Is that genetic?
Some of it, and some of it they're finding is environmental.
Really? Mm-hmm. Like toxins or plastics?
All of the things that we are exposed to.
Yep. Interesting.
So that can work more as an epigenetic trigger.
Yeah.
So you could have the
genes get expressed due to environmental causes. Yeah.
Where otherwise it wouldn't have been. Because if you have a recessive gene for it, normally you're okay. But with the environmental toxins, that recessive gene gets expressed.
Wow.
And it's an inflammatory response. There is some early evidence to show that it could also be a bacterial infection that causes it. So this is new research that's coming out.
Interesting.
So that's why I'm like, yeah, okay, well, we don't have any real solutions until we know what the driver is there. PCOS is polycystic ovarian syndrome, and this is where you have a group of eggs in your ovary that develop really large, and they look like cysts, but they're not actually viable for ovulation. So they cause a lot of pain. They can burst. The interesting thing about that is there's a transient PCOS for women who are coming out of low carbohydrate and low energy availability.
Wow.
Because if you start eating more carbohydrate, then your body's like, oh, there's fuel available to help develop these eggs. So it's not polycystic ovarian syndrome. It's actually eggs that are finally maturing. So people are assuming to be polycystic because they see on the ultrasound all these enlarged follicles of eggs, but it's really these eggs are maturing because finally we have the fuel for it. So when we're looking at what is PCOS and where does it fall, we have to also look at diet and diet habit. So there's lots of things that are now coming out in the research, but it's not being translated into what's happening in clinical practice.
Is there an association between PCOS and insulin resistance?
Yes. Because the real driver of true PCOS is...
It's a metabolic disorder, right?
Yeah.
In some ways.
It's a higher androgen content for women. So higher testosterone expression and higher insulin resistance. So we can look to control some of that through diet. And there is some areas of fasting that we can do, but it's really circadian rhythm, right?
Yeah.
So we eat breakfast, we eat all the way through the day, and we stop eating at dinner, and then we have a 12 to 14 hour overnight fast, and that really does help with PCOS symptoms.
Yeah, and that's just we're gonna talk about that, and this is probably a good segue. I really wanted to kind of set the stage of this notion of a healthy period, and maybe that's not the best way to frame it or say it because I know there's a lot of variation, but the idea that we want to create a lifestyle that allows us to have, a regular period, right? Is that a true statement?
Yeah.
So how do we back into a healthy period? What would be your advice? And you've lived this, you've written books about this. So I'm throwing you the biggest softball ever. But I kind of like that idea. And this is how, when I talk to my daughter, I'm like, we want to try to create conditions where your body feels safe.
Yes.
Right. Where you're doing the right appropriate amount of stress. That's hormetic, right? That's going to allow you to grow and evolve and adapt in a functional way. But it's understanding how to achieve that balance, right? And the period is like the best signal you could ever possibly have to know if your lifestyle is really serving you.
Correct.
Right.
The very first thing that I really encourage girls and women to investigate and understand is the actual bleed cycle. They want to see their normal flow rate. So maybe the first 2 days really heavy, then it backs off, then you have some spotting, and then maybe you have flow again. So every woman is relatively individual in their flow pattern. But when there's a change in it, or there's a change in the color of the bleeding, then we know that there's something wrong.
Okay. So paying attention, close attention, and tracking the color, the intensity of your flow, the pattern of your flow over the course of your period, and then of course the length of your period.
Yeah.
So those things.
Those are the three things. Because you can have, most women will have 3 to 4 anovulatory cycles a year.
Okay, where they're not
ovulating,
right?
But they will still have a bleed.
And that's totally normal.
It's absolutely normal.
Okay.
And what we see in the bleed is light flow and light color.
So when you're not ovulating.
When you don't have an ovulatory cycle, when you don't ovulate. So that's something else to so then you can kind of see,
I must not have ovulated.
Yeah.
And you can kind of see.
Right.
Yeah.
So if you start to have more and more anovulatory cycles, this is an indication your body is not stress resilient. So your body will you think that your cycle is normal because the length of the cycle might vary 2 to 3, maybe 4 days. But when that bleed pattern starts to change, that's the first warning sign. When you have a change in the actual cycle length, it shortens or really lengthens, that's a second sign that something's wrong. Okay. Because people will say, oh, I still have a cycle, but it's become irregular in the length. I'm still bleeding. But how long has that bleed been an ovulatory bleed? So that's why I want people to really watch their bleed patterns.
Yep.
And when we start getting those warning signs, then we can take a step back and say, okay, what is it? Have I been traveling a lot? Because that's a stress, right? Have I been resetting our circadian rhythm? That's a stress. Or if we're not in that situation, what is it? A change from winter to summer? Usually that
seasonal.
Seasonal variation. But if it's none of those like apparent things, then we have to say, okay, how are you sleeping? How are you eating? Are you fueling appropriately? What is your daily stress like? Do you have moments in time where you can take a 10-minute mindful pause, where you can just take that breath, reset? Because all those small little things will help decrease that sympathetic drive, decrease that tired but wired, and allow your body just to go, okay, I can get through this. I have what I need to get through this.
Yeah, just putting a little bit of gas in the tank. And I think we forget to kind of refuel along the way, and we end up just running on fumes.
Right. I don't think that I would take a big F-150 truck down the highway if it was on E.
Exactly.
So many women do that.
I know.
Some men, but for the most part, women do.
Yeah.
So they're rushing out the door and they're just doing all the things.
When I started at Whoop, there were just 50 of us. Now we're a team of over 500. Over the years, I've been asked so many times about how we find people who care about our mission as much as we do. Because at Whoop, we are a collective who are deeply committed to optimizing human performance. A critical part of that mission is building a team that embodies drive, adaptability, and a shared commitment to excellence. So when it comes to finding the right individuals to join our mission, getting it right isn't just important, it's foundational to our success. That's why whenever we're hiring, we use LinkedIn, who's the sponsor of this podcast. LinkedIn has and continues to simplify the hiring process, helping us craft job descriptions, post opportunities for free, and connect with top-tier candidates using real data insights. Even when our team logs off for the night, LinkedIn continues to work away in the background, identifying the best talent, leaving us to focus on advancing our mission. It's hardly surprising that more than 2.5 million small and medium-sized businesses use LinkedIn to hire. If you want to discover your next exceptional team member or post your next job for free, head to linkedin.com/soul. linkedin.com/soul. So you can find your next A player. Terms and conditions apply. I want to take a second to talk about our sponsor, Huel, and one of their products that has been game-changing for me. Most of you listening will know that the food we put in our bodies impacts how we perform. Our energy levels, ability to stay focused, to recover, all of it is dictated by our nutrition. But for many of us, we're short on time, and time is often one of the biggest barriers when it comes to eating well. For me, between my job and launching this podcast and my family, there are days when I feel like I only have minutes to grab something to eat. On those days, I have Huel Black Edition ready to drink. Firstly, because it's a balanced meal with 35 grams of protein and 27 essential vitamins and minerals, and it's low in sugar. Secondly, it tastes like a milkshake, and it's hardly surprising that Huel has sold over 500 million meals. If you've never tried Huel, take this opportunity and get 15% off by visiting my.huel.com/KristenHolmes and use code Kristen. You'll get a free gift with your first purchase. Terms and conditions in the description.
Okay, so the taxonomy, you identify stress as being like the real big culprit on, dismantling the healthy period.
Yep.
And this is because of the activation of the sympathetic branch of the nervous system. It's basically, again, fight or flight. We need to, adrenaline, cortisol, epinephrine, all
the things,
just mobilizing for energy, right?
Right.
And fight. But if we sustain that, it becomes chronic stress, maladaptive. So your kind of recommendations are to break up that stress with just mini moments of rest where we're activating the parasympathetic branch. That's a great recommendation. What would be your kind of second, like, big rock that really
Not
disrupts?
eating.
Okay, not eating.
Not
Just
eating.
like low calorie. So
yeah, and
insufficient.
and the timing of food too,
Yeah.
because my stressful avatar of a woman, right? A lot of people say that they'll eat all of the protein they need or they'll get what they need, but it's all stacked at the end of the day.
Yeah.
So if we are stacking things at the end of the day, then we see that the whole body goes through a catabolic state in the day. It's under a lot of stress. It's looking at how am I fueling? I don't have fuel. I have all these stressful situations from physical activity and mental stress to get through, but there's no fuel available for that.
You could almost think your body's eating itself.
It is because, I'm going to get fuel from my muscles and my bone and all the really metabolically active tissues.
Right.
And there's research that has come out showing that even if you eat enough calories, but you're bookending your calories on either end of the day, or you're not eating until 12 and you're eating from 12 to like 8 p.m., it causes an incredible catabolic load. And so you end up with menstrual cycle irregularities. And when we are like, okay, well, when we look at all the food trends that are out there, all the diet trends that are out there, it's perpetuating this. We're seeing intermittent fasting and we're seeing all these crazy diets that are out there. And I always go, well, if we look at why people are doing these diets for health outcomes, if we look at working with our bodies, so we're eating when we need it during the day and we're exercising, we get way better health outcomes without that significant stress.
Right. Stacey, you have to push into this a little bit because, I mean, there's so much talk about autophagy and that fasting and, how it's so great for you. And a lot of people swear by it, which is fine, but mechanistically and what we know in terms of circadian rhythms and the power of time restricted eating, talk through that for us and just help people, I guess, give people the language to be able to talk about, why they're choosing a time restricted eating kind of dietary strategy versus like an intermittent fasting.
Yeah, so these are nuances in the language that we have to define first and then explain some of the physiological. If we're doing time-restricted eating, I say that's a fancy way of just normal eating, where you get up and you have breakfast.
12 hours on, 12 hours off. Yeah. Boom.
So that's fine because we're eating for the task at hand and then we're living.
And that's how we were designed.
Right, exactly.
That's how we were built. Yes.
Right. Intermittent fasting is one that is very buzzy. Right. And we see anywhere from a 4-hour eating window with 20-hour fast or 16 and 8, lots of different variations of when you can eat. The issue, besides the no food during the day and stressing the body because you're holding your fast till like 12 or 1 and then you're breaking your fast and eating from 1 to 4 or whatever it is, or holding till 11 or 12 and eating until 6. The other part of that is people aren't really paying attention to what they eat in their eating window. So when we're looking at it, there are a few people that are like, oh, I'm just going to eat X, Y, Z and be healthy. In some extents, yeah, maybe, but you're still not distributing calories when they need to be or the protein distribution when it needs to be. You are reducing the amount of fiber that your gut needs because if you were to eat what your body needs, you'd be too full to get all the food that you need. So there's lots of issues with that tight eating window that can perpetuate a lot of the negative health outcomes that we're seeing. So when someone's like, I'm fasting for autophagy and for better health outcomes, I'm like, well, why don't you exercise? Because autophagy is part of exercise. Exercise in itself is a fasting state, and the recovery post-exercise is how your body gets stronger and more stress resilient. If you're looking at a large eating window, we see from population research that both men and women who hold a fast till 12 or after do not have any positive metabolic outcomes. For those who break their fast at 8 and then stop eating at 4 or 5, you have all of the positive health outcomes that you're looking for in fasting.
Yeah.
And when you're digging into it, you're like, okay, well, yeah, it's circadian rhythm driven, right? Your body has a pulse of cortisol and testosterone and estrogen and all the other hormones that require certain rhythmic throughout the day. You also have cellular timing. So if you're disrupting that, through holding food intake, your body is not going to be resilient.
Yeah. What else do women have to look out for, and be conscious of? So, stress, timing of eating. What else is sleep? Probably.
Yeah, sleep definitely.
Yeah, sleep, insufficient sleep is going to be. We actually we're going to publish these results, but not surprising. Sleep duration, predicted cycle regularity. Cycle pattern.
That, yeah.
So more regular, more time you spend in bed for women. Women who are meeting their sleep need are going to have more regular periods.
The other thing that we find, and I thought you guys were involved in this study, but maybe not, about hypoglycemia awakenings.
No.
Okay. So we're finding that a lot of really active women who aren't eating enough, they think they are, but they're not. They have a lot of awakenings overnight, and it's hypoglycemic.
Wow. Yeah.
So when we're
low blood pressure,
low blood sugar,
sorry, it's waking them up.
Yep. And they're like, why am I having such a shit sleep?
Wow.
And it's because they have these episodes of hypoglycemia that the body's like, whoa, okay, what's this? So that's, again, where we're looking at the fueling and the ability for inadequate fueling to affect what your body needs with regards to sleep and sleep quality.
Wow. Anything else that you feel like is
gut microbiome?
Okay.
Yeah.
All right.
Gut microbiome.
Yeah.
Really important to have a very diverse gut microbiome. So when we're looking at how the body regulates hormones, we have what's called a second pass. So your body releases estrogen, progesterone is released from the degradation of the corpus luteum, which is the housing of the egg. And it gets into circulation, but then the liver will take up some of the metabolites of it and bind it up with sex hormone binding globulin. That composition gets shot into the intestines through bile, where gut bugs will unconjugate it or unwrap it from sex hormone binding globulin and shoot it back out. So you actually have full effect of your hormones. If you have a low diversity, you reduce the ability for the body to have that second pass. Also, we see that as we get older, we are losing diversity, especially in women. That's one of the reasons we're seeing a change in body composition in late perimenopause. So we have to take care of that gut microbiome. When we're losing diversity, unfortunately, the growth of the bacteria that stays is the one that leans more into obesity. So we are looking at, okay, we want to have lots of fresh fruit, veg, whole grains, lots of prebiotic. We want exposure to lots of different things so that we can have a really good gut microbiome diversity. So I know in the UK, there's a push for 30 different plants in a week, right? So if we're looking at herbs, spices, plant foods, that is how we can have a baseline moratorium of having a diverse gut microbiome. If we have that, then we also have the availability of not only for our sex hormones to work properly, but then we also have a better uptake and use of vitamin D, which is important not only for sex hormone function, but also for iron absorption, bone health, muscle function. Yeah. So it's super important. And people who are on the go and they're like, I had some fiber today. If you're always picking the same fruit and same veg, you're not getting that diversity. So reach for all the different colors.
Gosh. Okay. So we talked about stress as being the thing that really crushes women, potentially unmanaged stress, negative stress accumulation. But there's also good types of stress like exercise and maybe hot exposure and maybe a tiny bit of cold exposure. Let's talk about the role of exercise, hot, cold, and how women need to be thinking about these various modalities to really upgrade kind of their internal scorecard.
Okay. So we have this like global issue of everyone wanting to be super comfortable. Like we sit in a room that's pretty much the same temperature year round.
Yeah.
We have cars, we have internet, we have all the things.
Elevators.
We
got
all the things, right? That makes everyone uncomfortable with challenge. So when we look at exercise, a lot of people are like, ugh, it's making me uncomfortable. except for those of us who have been in this field for so long. We're like, it's just part of the daily thing. So if we look at exercise as, well, what do I do, right? I need to be a little bit uncomfortable, but I don't really want to be uncomfortable. I always push people to strength training. Now, remember, I come from a big endurance background. So as I dig into the research of strength training, I'm like, oh, why didn't I do that earlier? I mean, I have played off and on throughout since I was 16, but really dedicated in the past about 4 or 5 years to making it part of what I do. Because when you look at strength training, not only does it improve all of the muscle function that we think about with strength training, but it has an incredible effect on brain, especially in women, with brain metabolism and the neuroplasticity that we need to kind of slow the risk for dementia and Alzheimer's. So even if you're 20 and you're like, well, just remember there's a sex difference at the onset of cognitive decline and Alzheimer's. There's a greater risk for women to develop that. So strength training through and through. It is a controlled stress that has such positive outcomes. If you're someone who's like, I already do that, well, then let's look at cardiovascular. When you're in your 20s, you can do whatever you want, really. Get away with it. When you start to get in your 30s and 40s and onward, we have to look at the intensity and the recovery between that because we want controlled stress. We want really high intensity, we want to recover from it, really high intensity, recover from it, and just small doses of that. We don't have to do it. It's all about the quality, not the volume. I have been recently getting a lot of DEXA results for a company that I do some work with. And they're primarily from women who are 30 to maybe 55. And those women who don't have a lot of strength training, their body fat percentage might be low, but they have an incredibly high score of visceral fat. And it has to do with, the cortisol increase, the low food, all of the stress.
So they can look lean, but it's the fat around their organs.
And it gets really apparent in the late 30s, early 40s, where a lot of women are like, what's going on? Things aren't working for me. So it's like, when you hit your 30s, you want to eye for what's happening in 10 years. Even if it doesn't seem relevant, it's totally relevant.
And tell me if I'm wrong here, but so just as a woman who, is transitioning into perimenopause, would you say that your base fitness level, the degree to which the quality of your muscle tissue, will that determine the type of symptoms you develop in perimenopause? Like how tough they are, or is there any relationship? Do we know? Do we have data around that?
There's a little bit that shows the fitter you are, the less severe
the symptoms are.
And it's better to look at what your mom and grandmother went through. So if your mom and grandmother went through a lot of hot flash and night sweats, but not so much of the other things, well, then you want to back it up and say, well, how can I increase my thermoregulatory responses?
Right. So there's a genetic predisposition there, so you need to really try to influence it with lifestyle to mitigate that potential, amplification of symptoms. Okay.
Right. So we come back down to strength training. Right. Makes you very stress resilient. And the more lean mass you have, the better you are able to cope with body composition change. You have better signaling from your skeletal muscle, the myokine releases, that all of that helps as we get into peri and postmenopause. If we're looking at thermoregulatory, that brings us down to the environmental challenges of hot and cold. So we see that every woman responds positively to the heat, both men and women.
So sauna.
Sauna,
I
super
love the sauna. I feel so good. When I sauna.
I know. It's great.
I try to do it 3 or 4 times a week.
And part of it is the way women thermoregulate versus men. So women vasodilate, so they, their vessels expand, especially the skin, to be able to offload internal heat. And someone will say, well, I never sweat. It's like, well, because your body's become very adept at thermoregulating through the skin. And then we'll start to sweat. So I could sit in the sauna for 20 minutes before I start sweating. My husband will start sweating within 5, right? And then he's like, I got to get out. So for women, being able to drive the core temperature up before you start sweating has a significant advantage with regards to cardiovascular health, meaning blood pressure control, the amount of blood that you have, circulatory responses. It also has a positive impact on blood glucose and insulin sensitivity. Also helps increase parasympathetic drive. So there's so many positive things that come with it. When we look at the cold water immersion, the cold plunge, fad that's going on.
Yeah, it's intense now.
It is super intense.
And I will say, as you know, like I definitely like the cold plunge.
Yeah.
But the data is not supporting
It does not.
cold plunge.
Yeah.
Now low fit people seem to actually be okay with more cold plunge because they're not putting other stress on their body.
And it's the inflammatory.
Yeah, potentially.
It's the inflammatory response, right? So if you're highly fit, your body's dialed into bringing that inflammation down through natural responses.
Right.
If you're low fit, you already have a systemic inflammatory response that's going on as part of being low fit. Mm-hmm. So if you're adding some cold plunge into that, it's a strong signal to reduce inflammation. So if you're looking,
that's why we see positive adaptation with the low fit folks.
Yep.
Okay, got it.
When we bring it into women, because of those thermoregulatory differences, when women get into ice, it is such a strong stress and a severe vasoconstriction that the body goes into that tired or, that sympathetic drive, and women don't start to shiver. They just have this incredible stress, and the body is like, So from a physiological and metabolic standpoint, there is no benefit for being in cold, like ice cold. You move the temperature up to about 15 or 16 degrees Celsius, which is around that 55-ish.
Yeah.
We see that women will get in, vasoconstrict, and then shiver.
Yeah.
When you start shivering, that's when you start to have your metabolic effects, the positive metabolic outcomes. Ice is way too cold. Men will start shivering in ice. One, they have less of a resistance with regards to body fat. So they'll vasoconstrict and then they'll get the signal to shiver to bring that temperature up.
Okay.
So when they're in the ice, there's a faster feedback for shivering. So then you're going to get all the metabolic changes because it's the way your body's trying to promote heat production. So it's going to improve glucose metabolism. It's going to improve the body's ability to use free fatty acids. It's going to improve hormone production. But because women don't shiver until they get into a little bit warmer, cold warmer, you don't get those metabolic outcomes.
Okay, great. So, going back to exercise for a second, I just want to make sure, I think people feel like they've got kind of a very clear understanding of where to apply their effort. If the goal is kind of longevity and maximizing kind of overall health during these various phases. So, reproductive years, prioritizing strength training always. And basically, if you have a menstrual cycle, regular menstrual cycle, strength train, very, very important. Perimenopause, menopause, strength training. Everyone should be strength training.
Yep.
How does the cardiovascular kind of, what would you recommend in terms of, I know you talk a lot about polarized training, so maybe we can kind of start there in terms of just your philosophy around, these really high intensity, like, these HIIT classes that women are taking. Like, what's your viewpoint on how we need to train our cardiovascular system? Because that is important as well.
It is. It is important. So if I'm going to pull out the data and be the science nerd.
Yes.
We see a lot of moderate intensity versus high intensity versus sprint interval training.
Okay. So moderate intensity, zone 3-ish, where we're uncomfortable, but not in a low intensity, not in a high intensity.
Right. So it's at 70%-ish.
Yeah. Of your maximum heart rate. Yeah.
And we're looking at high intensity interval training. That's 80 to 90% for the intervals and recovering at around 50%. For sprint interval training, that's like 100 to 110% of your max.
Yeah. So you're going just flat out as hard as you can. And
so
15 to 30 seconds max.
Right. So we have these three buckets. And so when we look at the research, we see that when high intensity interval training is done properly, we have an improvement in cardiovascular health with blood pressure control, vascular, all of the things. We also see an improvement in metabolic health because it's a stress. The body's like, hey, I need some carbohydrate. So it allows more expression of what we call the GLUT4 proteins. So this allows the cells to open up and allow glucose to come in without using insulin. So it improves insulin sensitivity. When we see sprint interval training, so that's at top end, it's such a strong stress. It creates an epigenetic change over time where we have an increase signaling from different myokines that then tell the liver to say, no, don't wrap up those fatty acids and make them esterified and store it as visceral fat. We want to use those fatty acids and store them in the skeletal muscle so that we have some available fuel when we're not sprinting. So there's a significant reduction in visceral fat when we do sprint interval training. We look at moderate intensity, which can be your 70%, which tends to be most of the HIIT classes.
Yeah.
Because you can't actually polarize your training when you're going to something like Orange Theory or F45.
Right.
They don't have...
Soul Cycle fall into that?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Unfortunately.
Yeah.
Because people go and they try to go too hard all the time and there's not enough recovery between the intervals. The issue with the addition of strength training to these type of classes is that it's not true strength training. It's lifting weight, but it's a load that can cause injury. It's not a load that will cause a positive adaptation.
Gosh.
And we don't get a hormonal response post-exercise from that kind of moderate intensity that we have an increase in growth hormone and testosterone, which drops cortisol.
Are those classes better than nothing?
You know what? I don't know.
That's like, that is like a crazy thought.
It is a crazy thought.
It's a crazy thought.
Because
coming from you, that should make people rethink how they're training and how they're spending their time. If you're working out, like, just do what's going to be it's going to create an effective adaptation. Like,
because I know, so you're paying to go to these classes. I understand the community because that's one of the 4 pillars. We're like mindfulness, sleep, physical activity, nutrition, and community. But when we look at these classes and the outcomes, especially as they're being pitched to women who are 35 plus, it drives that sympathetic, it drives that cortisol up, it increases visceral fat. It increases perpetuation of injury, where if someone isn't doing any of those things, they're not going to have that increase in cortisol. Yeah, they're going to have an increase in body fat. Might not be visceral fat. Like, we don't know.
Right.
I'm not saying being sedentary is the way to go, but if we're talking about walking or doing some body weight stuff versus going and smashing yourself in these classes, you might have better outcomes if that low intensity and some body weight stuff. I don't know. So when we pull out the real research and we look and we say high intensity interval training, great, really good for cardiovascular health and metabolic change. We look at sprint interval training. That's really powerful for brain health as well as body composition.
I'm a huge fan of sprint interval training.
Yeah, me too. It's really hard, but very effective.
Yes. And quick. You know, like,
time efficient.
Yes.
Super time efficient.
So time efficient.
Yeah.
You know, it's magical.
Yeah. So if we're looking at who should do what, when you're in your 20s, you can get away with these classes because you're more stress resilient.
Right.
But when you start getting 35 plus, you have to take a pause. You say, what do I want out of this? I want brain health. Then I have to look at lactate production and strength training. Lactate production comes from high intensity interval training, which could be minute on, minute off, or every minute on the minute by 4 and fifth minute off, like something that's structured that's going to produce some lactate, allow you to clear it.
Yep.
And sprint interval training, again, it drives brain health, it drives better body composition, and we're about quality over quantity.
Yep.
So
lower volume.
Low volume,
but high intensity. So you're going as flat out 15, 30 seconds. As soon as you your speed or quality starts to diminish, stop.
Recover.
Rest fully. And then repeat that 4 times, twice. You know, I think people, when they first start, they're probably going to be able to do 2 with quality.
Right.
And I think like when I do it, I always like, you know, I sprint as hard as I can, as fast as I can, the first one and I measure the distance. And then I just keep repeating that until I can't go that distance at the same time anymore. Right. Which is a good way of just knowing that, okay, my quality is not there anymore. I need to stop.
Right. And the other thing that people get confused about is it doesn't have to be running sprint.
Totally. Yeah. Right. I just prefer running, but
I know.
Could be on a bike.
You could be on a bike, kettlebell swings, battle ropes. It's about the intensity.
Yes. Yeah. Just going just driving your heart rate as high
as you can. Yeah.
Yeah.
And when we're looking at that kind of stuff and people, especially women who are older, are like, well, I can't sprint. I can't do that kind of intensity. Yes, you can.
You can.
And it's not something that you're going to go out the door and start right away.
No,
but
you got to build to it.
Right. If you're walking, then maybe you pick up your pace for 30 seconds.
Yeah.
And that's the way you get started. But it's really important for women to understand we don't want volume. We want the quality. So our bodies are becoming a little bit less stress resilient. So we want to add those in to improve stress resilience as well as all the longevity. And it's not about doing it every day.
Yep.
It's like peppering it in maybe 3, most 4 times a week. But the preference again is strength training minimum 3 times a week.
Yep.
So you could do a sprint finisher. That way you're very time efficient.
Interference, you don't really worry about that, right?
No.
Just recreation. I'm the same. I'm always, whenever I go on podcasts, I'm like, I'm not really in the interference. Yeah.
I'm not working with Olympic athletes here.
Yeah, when you're at the margins and trying to squeeze efficiency out of, your training, you're not going to do your strength training and your lifting on the same day, most likely. Or your strength training and your cardiovascular work on the same day, because you have your performance outcomes, right? But I think for us, like, you can absolutely run and lift on the same day.
Right.
Okay.
When you got a small amount of time, get it in.
You just get it done.
Let's go.
Yeah. Okay, good. And then, so we talked about the high intensity zone. And then I think there's also, again, if people are short on time, prioritize strength, sprint interval training, probably number 2, right? And then third would be kind of this base training, like lower level, zone 1, zone 2, where you can talk comfortably. And would you
your soul food.
Yeah.
Women don't have to do
a lot of that.
Right. I put it as it's the secondary and it's your soul food. It's going for a walk with a friend. It's doing a gravel ride with a group.
Yeah.
And it's just fun.
Long kind of jog in the nature.
Yeah. But that's not about increasing mitochondrial health, because we're already there by being women. We already have mitochondrial density, more so than men, more of the proteins, more MCT1s. We need to work glycolytic. We need to work those glycolytic fibers. We need to work the lactate production. That's what the high intensity is.
Yeah.
And then the soul food is something that I don't ever want to take away from people.
Yeah.
Because, I'm not giving up my gravel rides and my Sunday rides.
Yeah.
I think about it as it's not the mitochondrial function that we're after when women are doing the zone 2. It's the permission to go slow. And the enjoyability of being out in nature without any kind of pressure, or being with a friend. It's that whole reduction of stress around exercise that promotes the recovery and the benefits that most men perceive as being mitochondrial function. But when we look specifically at what's happening with mitochondria,
there's no mechanism there.
Not for women, because we already have all the things in play that men need to work on. We don't have the MCT4s.
We already have the flexibility.
Right. We are metabolically flexible.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, good. That's great clarification. All right. I want to end on menopausal hormone replacement therapy or hormone replacement therapy. What's your take on it?
It's a tool in the toolbox. And it can be very beneficial, but it's not the be all end all. Like, there's a lot of rhetoric out there that everyone needs to be on it for brain health and cardiovascular health. There's an evidence for that. There is evidence to show that if you have the APO4 gene predisposition to Alzheimer's, then yes, it does help. But for someone who's looking to prevent dementia, someone who's looking for a reduction in cardiovascular issues, MHT isn't the be all end all.
Yeah.
Exercise and other interventions are much stronger. Right. We look at strength training, we look at cardiovascular work. Those two have better implications for preserving cardiovascular function, reducing your LDL, reducing your cholesterol, improving your gut microbiome. All your lifestyle factors have a better play.
Yeah. So how you sleep, your reduction of alcohol, like your hydration, like all of the just the big, simple rocks we should all be doing every day. Are going to have a bigger impact than
just using.
Right. So they have to be done in tandem for sure.
Yeah, absolutely. Because you can't just, I think people think that when you go on MHT, I get my estrogen back.
Yeah.
And then that drives everything, but that's not what it's happening. Because even if it's.
Say more about that. Yeah.
So if we're looking at the different formulations of menopause hormone therapy, I'm not calling it replacement therapy. So we're not replacing things. That's the misconception. We're not driving our hormones back to where they were in our reproductive years.
What are you calling it?
Menopause hormone therapy. It's a subset of hormone replacement therapy. Because if we talk about hormone replacement therapy, that means that you have thyroid dysfunction, you have to take thyroid medication.
Okay.
Or if you have premature ovarian failure, maybe we put you on an oral contraceptive pill to bring your levels back up to reproductive years. But we're talking about menopause hormone therapy. It's a therapy to attenuate the change that's happening, to effectively affect the symptomology of hot flashes, night sweats, mood, all of the things that are symptomology of perimenopause. It doesn't stop it. It just slows it. It slows the severity, slows the rate of change.
Okay.
It does not stop what happens with body composition. It does help protect bone because it slows the rate of bone loss. But you have to put in the lifestyle change in order to keep progressing and benefit what's happening here with menopause hormone therapy and to improve and age well.
What if you don't have any symptoms? Really, you know, like you don't really have any perceptible mood changes. Your sleep is generally okay. No hot flashes. MHT?
You don't need it. It's a discussion that you can have with your physician, but I really want people to ignore the chatter that's out there of because there's
very
so
loud.
It's very loud.
Very, very
and it's
loud.
become very loud in the past year and a half.
Yeah.
Because you have the influence from the UK that used to rebrand it as female hormone deficiency syndrome. It's a natural part of aging. You think about puberty and all the things that happen with the exposure of estrogen, progesterone.
Right.
Our body's on the other side.
Yeah.
We're starting to downregulate. Our systems are being affected. But if you have had a menstrual cycle in your life, you're going to go through it.
Yeah.
It's a natural part of aging.
Right.
Different cultures have different perspectives of it. Unfortunately, the Western culture, especially our culture, really looks at women aging out by the time they're 40. So let's use a pharmaceutical fix. It's not about replacing your reproductive hormone levels. Again, it is about having a quality of life that allows you to age well. So if you aren't having symptoms and you're not having any kind of interference, take a pause and say, do I really need to introduce the pharmaceutical agent? If you're really worried about bone density, get a DEXA, see what's happening there. If you have low bone density, maybe you do want to start it so that you don't become osteopenic. But if you're falling into the rhetoric of I need it to prevent dementia, don't do that because that's not part of it.
What do you think about OC for just to manage irregular periods if there's no other symptoms?
For perimenopause, it's better to use an IUD with maybe, and see how that works.
Yep.
Some of the menopausal doctors will do an estrogen gel with an IUD.
Okay.
So there's ways of looking at what you're doing instead of, because if you're looking at using an OC, that's a different dosage. And you're not, yes, you're downregulating your own endocrine system, but you're not respecting the receptors that also need to downregulate. So when you're looking at what's happening in perimenopause, I think Lisa Mosconi has some really good MRI images of the brain just being flared with estrogen receptors because it's trying to soak up all the estrogen. So if you're supplying an OC, you're not allowing the body to naturally go through its feedback mechanism to downregulate some of those receptors.
Oh, interesting.
So then when you come off it, you're going to have symptoms. And the OC isn't designed for women who are 60, 70 years old to be on it.
Right.
Menopause hormone therapy is because it's a lower dose. It's more biologically available. And it does allow some of the downregulation of those receptors.
What does it mean to be human?
I have thought about this through my entire life. And for me, what I think it means to be human is to actually experience being human, meaning that you have all of the emotions. You fall in love, your heart gets broken. You fall in love, you understand what that means. You have loss, you have a gain. You have depression, you have severe elation. When you go through all of those emotions, it allows you to experience what it means to be human and understand other people's points of view, have empathy, because if you go through life and you don't have that expression of emotion, you don't really experience what is in front of you. You're always looking forward or living in the past, being present and understanding the people around you. That's what I think makes you human.
I love that. And I feel like that philosophy you just outlined very much shows up in your work in terms of, like you're not about muting signals, like you're about letting those signals be there for us as a source of insight, that allow us to have more agency over our life. It's kind of like thank you for sharing that.
You're welcome.
Let's take a second to talk about Whoop. the sponsor of this show, where I work as the global head of human performance, principal scientist. Across January, we ran a campaign called January Jumpstart to help our members build plans for 2025. Our January Jumpstart campaign aimed to really inspire folks to choose from one of the 5 tracks. Across these 5 tracks, we saw our members improve, which was so cool to see. Behavior change, of course, does not stop on January 31st. It is a 24/7, 365-day-a-year mission. It is about just small, consistent change every single day. So keep motivated and hold yourself accountable with Whoop. With features like Whoop Coach, weekly plans, and trends, you can better understand your health and how your actions can work to improve it. If you'd like to experience the power of behavior change, head to join.whoop.com/science to sign up for 1 month free trial.